got a guy here. No identification. Won't give his name. Says he's your brother. Says his binoculars killed somebody.
That's my brother, Jerry Horn.
Now you can't tell me that the most important plot line in Twin Peaks wasn't resolved in the finale.
And you can send clothes. When we picked him up, he was completely naked. Have a good day, sir.
Hey everyone, Greg and Ryan here. This is the final breakdown for Twin Peaks: The Return.
Okay, before we get started, make sure to subscribe to the GameSpot Universe channel. We've still got more Game of Thrones, Rick and Morty, and the finale of Preacher coming up, plus more Twin Peaks.
Right off the bat, we start with Cole confessing to Albert that he kept something from him for 25 years. Before Major Briggs disappeared, he told Gordon and Cooper about his discovery of an entity. It was an extreme negative force. In the ancient times, it was called
Jiao Day. Over time, it's become Judy.
Cooper told Gordon that if he ever disappeared, to do everything he could to find him. Tiny side note, we find out that Ray was a paid informant for the FBI. Cole receives a call from the FBI in Vegas, and Bushnell Mullins comes in to deliver Cooper's message.
I am headed for Sheriff Truman's. It is 2:53 in Las Vegas, and that adds up to a 10, the number of completion.
And just like that, the FBI is on their way to Twin Peaks.
Yep. I also like that we get the most Agent Albert line, I think, of the whole season right at the end.
We found Douglas Jones.
But we don't know where he is.
Has my watch stopped, or is that one of the Marx brothers?
Also, one thing I like at the beginning of that scene before Cole gives his series recap was that he couldn't pull the trigger on Diane, and that makes a whole lot more sense when we go further into these two parts.
Also, Cole delivers one of my favorite lines in the episode.
I said you've gone soft in your old age.
Not where it counts, buddy.
Suck it to me, suck it to me.
Suck it to me, suck it to me, suck it to me, suck it to me.
Next up, Mr. C uses the final set of coordinates to try to find Judy. The coordinates lead to the White Lodge portal that's right next to Jack Rabbit's palace. Once inside, Mr. C is locked in a cage, and we see Major Briggs' head, and we also see the firemen floating up in the air just like we saw in Part 8.
Off to the side, there was also an endless chamber of those lodge-style electrical generators.
And this is the moment the fireman lays his trap on Mr. C and Bob. The theater screen reveals the location of Judy, the Palmer house, and the fireman makes a quick switch to send Mr. C outside the sheriff's station instead.
What is this?
A surprised Andy brings Mr. C inside.
Agent Cooper!
Hello, Lucy.
We were just talking about you.
So I understand.
Okay, here's where everything goes to level 11. Not too long after Mr. C sits down with Frank, Truman gets a call from the real Agent Cooper. And then this happens.
What was that?
Lucy figured out how cell phones work, apparently. And I love the fan service they put in there, and I wasn't shocked one bit that was pretty much the end of the fan service going forward right at that point.
I love it too. Her trademark switchboard management that has been part of the entire series kind of saved Twin Peaks at the end of the day. If it wasn't for her, we don't know what would have happened.
No, there was another with a glove that helped out too.
Right, so down in the lockup, Chad breaks out, Andy comes in, and Freddy intervenes with his glove. Takes out Chad. Fuck you, Chad.
James, Naito, Freddy, and his green glove companion are brought upstairs as Hawk comes running in. The room goes dark and the woodsmen start working on reviving Mr. C in the same fashion of Part 8. Agent Cooper arrives and sees the woodsman working on Bob. The Bob orb exits Mr. C's body and Freddy finally figures out his destiny.
That's right. Initiate your destiny.
Freddy punches the orb a few times, with one last punch sending it through the floor as if he's sending Bob straight to hell. The Bob orb comes out again and attacks Freddy one more time. Freddy punches it one last time and it shatters. The pieces float up and pass through the ceiling. Now, is this the end of Bob? I have no clue, but I would love to know how Frost and Lynch came up with the Freddy Sykes character out of nowhere. They could have had this be any character in Twin Peaks, but they said, nope, let's make it a new character and he's gonna show up in the final episodes. He's gonna show up in the final parts. It's crazy.
It could have been James even.
Yeah.
Like working at the same place.
There are gonna be so many recaps and people asking questions to David Lynch and Frost. I just wanna know that one question of what was the idea behind Freddy Sykes. I love it.
I think that's a good number one. I was still a little bummed to see Mr. Cooper go out like that. It's very Dick Halloran and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining. He goes all this way, this whole journey, just to get shot in the back of the head. Over 18 parts, I grew to appreciate him. Unlike Leland Palmer, Mr. Cooper had control of Bob. In fact, it's possible that all Bob was doing for him was making him invincible. I think Mr. C may have been going to Twin Peaks to free himself of Judy's influence. Remember, when he goes into the lodge, we see the Palmer's home on the screen before the fireman swipes right over to the sheriff's department. I had some investment in the idea that Good Dale and Bad Dale would team up to defeat Judy, but it also makes sense that the lodge/FBI wouldn't care about Mr. Cooper's interests. He was a free agent, looking out for himself, living the American dream.
How's Mr. C gonna go out? Oh, he's gonna get shot by Lucy, and then a man with a green glove is gonna punch Bob out of existence.
Right, that makes sense.
Oh yeah. After everything that just transpired, Cooper walks over to Mr. C and puts the Alcave ring on his finger, and his doppelganger finally returns to the Red Room.
One for the grandkids.
Cooper grabs the room key to the Great Northern from Frank, and then things take a turn the moment he lays eyes on Nieto. And then we get a superimposed Dale Cooper, like, over the screen for, like, fades in and out at points. It was really weird, but then I realized that this is probably the moment that he realizes that he's in a dream. The whole Twin Peaks gang shows up like it's the ending of The Wizard of Oz. And then Cooper explains,
Now, there are some things that will change. The past dictates the future.
Nieto goes over to Cooper and they touch hands. Her face starts to smoke and Diane takes Nieto's place, now with red hair.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. And then we get the clock stuck ticking on 2:53, and then Ghost Cooper hits us with,
"We live inside a recap.
what the fuck was that?
We live inside a dream."
Cooper tells everyone,
I hope I see all of you again.
the room goes dark again, and somehow Cooper, Diane, and Gordon are walking in the boiler room at the Great Northern, where James was looking around a few parts back. The key opens the locked door, and Cooper tells the crew to not follow him through. And then he gives one final line to Diane.
See you at the curtain call.
Cooper meets up with Philip Gerard, and he recites the Fire Walk With Me chant.
One chance out between two worlds. Fire, walk with me.
They walk to where Philip Jeffries' teapot is located in the Red Diamond City Motel. Cooper then gives Jeffries the date, February 23rd, 1989. Yeah, so apparently Jeffries can send people through time or something.
You didn't know that already?
Duh.
Say hello to Gordon if you see him. He'll remember the unofficial version.
I also like that Jeffries has some sort of slight humanity left. He says it's good to see you. The whole Jeffries circumstance reminds me of Captain Powell in John Carpenter's first film, Dark Star. There, the dead ship's captain is kept on ice for consultation, and he's totally out of it when they talk to him.
This is where you'll find Judy.
Next up, we see the Alcave symbol transform into an infinity symbol, and Gerard screams electricity, and Coop is sent back to the moments right before Laura Palmer's death in Fire Walk With Me. So I took that as like just the infinity sign, like this is time, and then the little ball, boop, this is where we're gonna send you.
Yeah, move you from one place to the other.
Mm-hmm. Cooper appears in the woods and sees Laura and James from the exact same scene from Fire Walk With Me right before Laura says her final goodbye to James. In the original scene, they ride a little and Laura jumps off the bike to meet Leo, Jocks, and Ronette. Now in this reality, Laura starts walking and she sees Cooper standing in the woods.
I've seen you in a dream.
Cooper reaches his hand out to her and everything from the past starts to change. Laura Palmer's body, wrapped in plastic, flickers out of existence. And Pete Martell finally goes fishing. Laura asks Cooper, where are we going? And Cooper hits us with,
We're going home.
All right, and that's it. Everything's fixed. Good night, folks. That was perfect. Oh, I loved it. Oh, man. From there, at the present day Palmer house, there's moaning in the distance. It's Sarah crying. In the living room, she grabs Laura's picture and stabs it with a bottle over and over. Back in the woods, Cooper tries to take Laura to the portal for the White Lodge. Even though they were holding hands, we hear that strange clicking noise from part 1. And Laura is suddenly gone. She can be heard screaming just like in part 1. The woods turn to a stage at the Roadhouse. Julie Cruz is singing The World Spins for the final performance of The Return. When part 17 ended, you and I were both looking at each other like, that felt complete to me. Like, that was it. You got Bob gone and Laura's back in the lodge or whatever's going on. Like, if you were gonna end it there, that's fine. That would have been a cool ending. But we got a better one. Okay, let's do this.
Are you sure?
Yes, we have to talk about part 18.
But things might change.
Whatever, I don't care. Electricity. It's fine.
Sure, we're good.
Yeah.
Part 18 is where the return departs from the original Twin Peaks storyline proper and has been the subject of much speculation and disappointment. For those who have been watching our recaps, you will remember that my wingnut theory after part 16 was that the conclusion would be a prequel like Fire Walk With Me. I was partially right about that, but I also warned that some things will remain unresolved and we should be prepared.
There's some fear. Some fear in letting go.
I actually love the dreamy darkness of part 18. I believe the series is complete with this conclusion. It gave me the impression of a grander design beyond a supernatural murder mystery of the original series. Blossoming with a cosmic battle caused by man-made self-destruction, a fight between light and darkness that has entered its house, with time and dimension-traveling FBI agents sworn to defend the good rolled into it. Before we go any further, I want to say a few things about reading Lynch. Over the last 20 years of his career, he's developed a film grammar around dreams, reflections, and perception. He began with a simple story of a flawed marriage expressed through the subjective and transformative lens of the kind of psychosis and paranoia that can arise in that space. After a statement digression that showed he could peacefully ruminate on aging in a simple, straight story, Lynch moved into Mulholland Drive. The film was originally intended to be a television series, but fate would have it that he would instead transform the pilot into a feature film about the ravages of Hollywood and how its bleak, male-dominated soul grinder would even turn women who loved one another against each other. In that film, it takes an accident, literally a car accident, to give the soul of Camilla Rhodes the rare transcendental opportunity to perceive the recurring destructive cycle for what it is. And what it is has plenty of room for interpretation between the forces of pure evil, pure good, and every pawn in between their struggle. Like Twin Peaks, Mulholland Drive is filled with curious transitions, time shifts, doppelgangers, and other dreamlike elements. And you were there, 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 and you were there. Lastly, Inland Empire is probably the height of untethered David Lynch. If you thought aspects of The Return are inscrutable, I challenge you to unpack Inland Empire at 3 hours, shot entirely on mini-DV, and positively bananas. Full disclosure, I never unpacked it myself. I could only sit through it once, and for as intrigued as I was, I couldn't go back in. And you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there.
And that's what's brought us to where we are today.
Finally, we get to Twin Peaks: The Return, an 18-part film that builds upon Lynch's fascination with dreaming, in collaboration with Mark Frost and sourcing out of their works from 25 years ago, and most recently Frost's novel, The Secret History of Twin Peaks. The Return is not different from these other works by Lynch. It is likely mechanically or narratively sound, at least I should say The Return specifically. It is possible that the design for The Return is not entirely mechanically sound with the original series or even Fire Walk With Me. There is also so much more to deconstruct than we've ever had before, 18 parts, that drawing a solid conclusion or a correct interpretation will take more than just a few days and crucial further viewing. Most importantly, its interpretation is more up to you, the viewer, to find personally than it is to conclude a narrative final summation.
What the fuck?
Did we ask you to tell him her life story?
For 4 fucking hours?
That said, we will hazard such a conclusion here, and my theory that follows is the correct interpretation. Just kidding. This is my best first swing at something that I hope to look at more deeply for some time to come. In part 18, we depart from Twin Peaks and move into uncharted territory. Mr. Cooper burns in the Red Room, Mike manufactures a new Dougie Ganger for Janie E. Dale has definitely lost Laura Palmer as we hear the sound from the phonograph in part 1, followed by Laura's scream. That scream, Laura's scream, we've now heard so many times, especially in just these two parts, that it's becoming like the famous Wilhelm scream. We go back to the Red Room where events from the beginning of the return play out again, but with variation. Significantly, the evolved arm says,
It's the story of the little girl.
I read this as implying that the original Twin Peaks universe was perhaps the wrong occurring timeline in which to reacquire Laura. Following this, Dale exits the Red Room via the door he attempted to exit through in part 2. Here he is reunited with Diane.
Is it really you?
In this moment, our time-traveling duo is finally united. This is where Dale was trying to go all along, but couldn't because of his split existence. The curtains fade, and soon they're on the open road. Diane questions whether they should go through with their plan, but Dale is insistent. They reach the dividing line, 430 miles exactly from somewhere, or somewhen else. The biggest electrical wires we've seen in the entire series are humming. Echoing Dale's warning at the sheriff's department, they kiss, knowing they may not see each other again for a long time. Next, it's nighttime. The mood is different. They stop at a motel where Diane sees another version of herself outside. What follows is an awkward lovemaking scene reminiscent of the one in Lost Highway. The Platter's My Prayer plays as Diane goes into a darker and darker space.
My prayer.
In the morning, she is gone, but has left a note.
Dear Richard. Richard. When you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. I don't recognize you anymore. Sorry, whatever it was we had together is over. Linda.
So here we finally get Richard and Linda. They have transformed and by moving through time/reality have forgotten each other. Linda's note echoes the loss of knowing someone from the Audrey and Charlie scenes.
Who are you, Charlie?
The side effects of time travel. I imagine this has happened many times. A tragic professional hazard for time coops. Richard's reaction is not immediately understanding of this change either. Does he remember his meeting the fireman? Side note, props to all the predictors who had Diane as both Nido and Linda. That was great on the anagram theory.
Good job, guys.
I honestly didn't think that was the case, but shit. When Richard emerges from the motel room, it is an entirely different motel and possibly an entirely different time. He glances back at the room as though he's forgotten something he can't place. Has he forgotten Diane? He drives into Odessa, Texas, population 99,940. I looked this up. This was the population from the 2010 census, which places his instance at roughly that time. He drives to a diner called Eat at Judy's. Side note, the real-world restaurant is called Eat at Rudy's, and it's in Wilmington, California. I'll bet the owner has no idea what they signed up for when they decided to do Twin Peaks. They're about to have years of Twin Peaks fans streaming through that diner. Here, Richard encounters some rude, gun-toting Texans that he quickly and efficiently dispatches. I'm going to credit Mark Frost with getting one more gun proliferation jab in before the series was up. Richard then gets the waitress to write down the address of the other waitress who works there. This is an interesting scene because it's apparent that Richard is a full Cooper. He is methodical and a bit cold like Mr. C, but still somewhat considerate.
Where do you hang this?
Finally, he arrives at the home of the other waitress. The number 6 pole from the Fat Trout trailer park is here. The woman who answers the door is played by Cheryl Lee, but she insists she is not Laura Palmer, but Carrie Page. No relation. However, she does show some recognition at the mention of Sarah Palmer. He implores her to join him on a trip to Twin Peaks, which she agrees to because, well, she's got her own problems. My original read on the rest of Part 18 was that Dale had quantum leaped into a timeline without Laura and just doppelganger or possibly Tulpa of Laura, and that he had simply failed this mission, this instance. However, now I think that Laura could be a time agent too, and just as capable of forgetting herself as the others. The dead man in her home has been shot in the head, but he also has a gut wound that looks conspicuously like a bad orb may have emerged, but was destroyed by Agent Palmer.
Also in that scene, take note of that white horses behind that blue plate. We've always thought that the white horses represent death, suffering, drugs, and they're always around Sarah Palmer, which makes people think now that that white horse might represent Judy as well. I believe that.
Yeah, I mean, now that we have that hindsight, it seems so much more clear.
I mean, and think about in episode 8.
The horse is the white of the eyes, and dark within.
What transpires next is possibly the most harrowingly slow sequence of the entire series. Yeah, slower than that. They drive from Odessa, Texas to Twin Peaks, Washington. So to be totally fair, in Twin Peaks' formal cadence, it's totally appropriate. There's no Sir Davos speedy fast travel in this finale just to move things along. Eventually they arrive in Twin Peaks. They pass the Double R and are soon at the Palmer house. Here, Richard introduces himself as Special Agent Dale Cooper. There are a host of possibilities at this point. He transitioned back to Coop when he left the motel, or that Richard believes he is in the Twin Peaks timeline where he should impersonate Cooper. Whatever the case, Sarah Palmer does not live at the house anymore, or never did. We learned it was formerly owned by Mrs. Chalfant and currently belongs to Alice Tremond and her husband. Mrs. Tremond, of course, and her grandson are memorable from earlier Twin Peaks canon. She gave Laura the picture of the transition space that leads sometimes to the Red Room and recently to the limbo version of the Red Diamond Motel. Mrs. Chalfant is also the former owner of the trailer underneath which Chester Desmond discovered the Owl Cave ring before disappearing from reality. If this is around 2010, we can conclude that in this reality or timeline, the Chalfants did better financially, but are still somehow connected to the darkness. So the journey was a bust. Richard and Carrie return to the street where Richard pauses, trying to figure out his missteps or miscalculation. He asks,
"What year is this?"
Moments later, Sarah Palmer's voice from episode 1 of the original Twin Peaks calls out for Laura.
Laura!
Then Carrie lets out the Laura scream. The lights go out in the Tremond home, electricity pops, and we go to black. Ominous, dark Badalamenti music fades in, followed by Laura whispering into Dale's ear in the Red Room. My read is that Carrie realized she was Laura, screamed, and straight up popped the timeline out of existence. The submission from that reality was complete. This universe's Bob was dead, and Dale had located Laura. Back in the Red Room, Laura is whispering to Dale again, this time about the next reality that Time Coop will be sent to.
I like that theory a lot, but I read the ending slightly different. First off, I believe Coop and Diane entered Judy's reality timeline, dimension, whatever you want to call it. Judy steals away Laura when Coop is rescuing her, and Diane and Coop give chase. Here, Richard and Linda seem to be indistinguishable from their doppelgangers. Diane retains all the trauma of her doppelganger, which we see from her car, and Cooper maintains many of the characteristics of Mr. C.
I don't know if the oil's hot enough to set off those bullets, but I'd move away.
Now Diane falls into Judy's ugly reality and becomes Linda to Cooper's Richard. And this is the moment I couldn't help but think of one of the all-time greatest films ever made, and one of my favorites, Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo. Richard mirrors so much of Scotty from Vertigo that it's impossible not to notice.
One final thing I have to do, and then I'll be free of the past.
Two men that are engulfed in a dream that they can't seem to break. One damn near goes insane for a love that's not real, and the other is driven by his FBI detective morals to finish a case no matter the cost.
I have to go back into the past once more, just once more, for the last time.
I believe Judy tried to stop Coop from his mission and have him fall into the fake world just like Diane did. Hence the motel shifting before and after Diane and Cooper stay, or Laura being off at work that day at Judy's. Also the dead body, another attempt by Judy to make Dale question whether or not this is truly Laura. But Coop remembers what the fireman tells him, and he takes Carrie back to the Palmer home. Of course, Sarah isn't there, and Cooper is almost ready to give in at this point. He's looking for any sign of help. It even looks like he's possibly looking for Mike to help out when he slumps down. But then he says,
"What year is this?"
Sarah reaches out to Laura, and Laura suddenly remembers everything. She becomes Laura again. The electricity goes out in the Palmer house, and Judy is defeated. that's what I got out of that. Who knows how this theory holds up in the next days, weeks, months, years. I don't know. It's going to probably evolve a million times from now.
I mean, it should take some time. You know, when I was younger, I watched Mulholland Drive 5 times in a movie theater and had to sit down at a cafe and figure it out over a few hours. Well, this is an 18-part series, and that's just this part of that. And just to get the crucial second viewing out is an 18-hour journey.
And that's it for us over here, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. This has been an honor and a privilege to get to talk about Twin Peaks every single week. I loved it.
I mean, these are some of my favorite filmmakers, and special thanks to Mark Frost, David Lynch, the great cinematography from Peter Deming, expert cutting by Dwayne Dunham, and music supervision by Dean Hurley, Kyle MacLachlan, Laura Dern, Naomi Watts, the whole cast of the series, and of course, everybody who's watched it with us. Join us in the comments, hit us on Twitter. It's been wonderful. What are you doing?
This isn't over yet. I'm gonna go find Audrey, goddammit.
What recap is this?